Germany's so-called elite. The Führer's Guard. A black order. The end result is a crime the likes of which the world has never seen. June 6th, 1944. Hitler's enemies land on the coast of Normandy. With heavy losses, Allied troops overcome the German defenses. Nazi Germany now has to fight on two fronts, in the west and on the eastern front. Units of the Waffen-SS are deployed to France to stop the Western powers. On their way to the front, they are ordered to take action against French partisans. The resistance has already taken control of entire towns. Among them, the town of Tulle. Soldiers of the Waffen-SS recapture Tulle. The residents are ordered to assemble in the market square. While some SS men enjoy themselves in the cafe, others arbitrarily select men from among the residents. They hang 99 of them, as revenge for the German soldiers killed by the resistance.
This was a kind of troop that was meant to have no pity for Germany's enemies, or those people who are designated Germany's enemies by the SS and by Hitler.
Deterrence through mass murder. But the resistance also takes revenge.
There were counter-shootings of German prisoners, and then, typical of the SS, they show that they're even tougher, even more unconditional, and actually wipe out an entire village in Oradour. The men were shot, and the women and children were driven into a church and burned alive there.
The Massacre of Oradour-sur-Glane. In 1944, SS men murder 642 people here. Men, women, children. Afterwards, the village is destroyed. The remains of Oradour still stand today as a memorial.
Oradour-sur-Glane is certainly not the only crime committed by the SS, but it is symptomatic of a culture of violence and enforcement, of repression and terror. According to the principle of harshness, a harshness against oneself, the ability to overcome one's inhibitions in order to commit the worst atrocities.
Nazi propaganda styles the men of the Waffen-SS as a military elite. Recklessness and uncompromising combat readiness bring them admirers, and death and terror to their opponents. These are heroes with a contempt for death. Invincible. That is the propaganda. The reality is different. July 1940. Victory celebrations in Berlin for the German Wehrmacht. In just 6 weeks, it has defeated France, its so-called arch-enemy.
Die Männer der Waffen-SS nehmen an diesem Ruhm teil.
Hitler uses the term Waffen-SS officially here for the first time, in his Reichstag speech after the French campaign. The plan to turn the SS into armed military units is much older. Even before Hitler came to power, the SS dreamed of elite warriors.
This soldierly element was there from the very start, with the uniforms, the marching, the military sports, and so forth. In 1933, the SS went on to establish individual armed units relatively quickly.
The former cadet school in Berlin-Lichterfelde, the barracks of one of the first armed SS units. In 1933, Hitler personally orders the expansion of his bodyguard and commissions Josef, known as Sepp Dietrich, to do this. Within a few months, the SS Sonderkommando increases in size to almost 800 men, all of them loyal volunteers and ardent Nazis. At the Reich Party Congress in 1933, Dietrich's troop receives its final name, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. The dictator's ruthless private army, a nucleus of the Waffen-SS. At the same time, the Reichswehr claims to be the nation's sole bearer of arms. An army with Prussian tradition, officially limited to 100,000 men by the Treaty of Versailles.
Hitler was looking for alternatives or auxiliaries, a way of building it up, and so the SS Verfügungstruppen were the kind of nucleus of an alternative military force.
In 1934, the SS establishes more armed regiments, troops at the disposal of the Führer. Ostensibly no competition for the regular army, more a kind of military state protection. At the end of 1935, the Verfügungstruppe consists of the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, with a good 2,600 men, and the two SS-Standarten Deutschland and Germania, so almost 5,100 men in total. SS Chief Himmler wants his men to form an elite Nazis and elite warriors. For this, he needs well-trained officers. Bad Tölz in Upper Bavaria. This is where Himmler has the first SS Reichsschule built in 1934. A large new structure is built for it. And the so-called Junkerschule in Bad Tölz. Sport is very much the order of the day. Ideologically trained, physically fit warriors. That is the training goal for the young SS officers.
And those who came together there had already been with the SS for some time. So here we didn't have a cross-section of the German male population, as was more likely with the Wehrmacht at least. Instead, these were men, young men, with a clear National Socialist outlook.
In 1935, the second Junker School is established in the castle of Braunschweig. Himmler successfully recruits a retired Reichswehr general as inspector of the Junker schools and the dispositional troops, Paul Hauser.
Himmler needs a military expert. After all, he wants to create military units that are also supposed to perform militarily. And that can't be done merely with amateurs or street fighters. A certain amount of expertise is required. And Hauser, as a general, is the man who provides that expertise.
Hauser organizes the training. Prospective SS officers are trained in technology and tactics. The curriculum also includes a world view in line with Himmler's wishes. Germanic history, Aryan race studies, the delusion of the so-called Lebensraum. Those are the main subjects of study. The Nazi worldview will penetrate the head of every SS man.
Looking back, I think it was a very strong spirit of comradeship, based on the same mindset, so to speak. It was based on the fact that we were convinced we were fighting a just war. We were convinced that we were the master race, and we were the pick of that master race. And that really does bind people together.
The aim of the training is conquest. Hitler does make frequent speeches about peace, but he wants war, and as soon as possible. April 20th, 1939. Hitler's 50th birthday. Germany's army shows what it has to offer. It's a demonstration of power. Less than 4 months later, Hitler orders the invasion of Poland. On September 1st, 1939, the Second World War begins. Approximately 4.5 million soldiers of the regular army have armed units of the SS fighting alongside them, and accounting for not even 1% of its total strength. On October 4th, 1939, the German Ufer-Tonwoche newsreel reports on the Polish campaign and on the SS warriors under Sepp Dietrich.
Auf seiner Fahrt an die Front von Warschau begrüßt der Führer seine Leibstandarte, die sich bei dem Siegeszug in Polen glänzend geschlagen hat.
Reality has very little to do with the Nazi propaganda. Dietrich's Leibstandarte has suffered heavy losses. The professionals from the Wehrmacht criticize the fighting behavior of the SS men.
Combat not only requires soldiers to be passionate fighters, most importantly, different troops also have to cooperate. The infantry does attack, but it also requires simultaneous, coordinated support from artillery fire. At least at the beginning. That was one of the weak points of the SS.
In their frontline reports, officers of the Wehrmacht complain about the tactical shortcomings of the SS men. One example, the Leibstandarte was only partially able to carry out its mission. It became engaged in bitter frontal house-to-house fighting with a weak enemy, to which it was inferior in infantry combat terms. The fighting style of the SS was characterized by blind bravado and a lack of leadership.
The Wehrmacht strongly criticizes the actions of the Waffen-SS, especially its military performance, which is seen as inferior. But there's also a lot of competitive thinking involved, and there are certain grounds for that. But the point is precisely that the Wehrmacht absolutely does not agree with the fact that a separate SS troop is going into battle alongside it.
The SS is conspicuous, above all, for its brutal attacks on the civilian population. The perpetrators are men like Hermann Müller-John. Before the war, he led the music corps of the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. As SS Hauptsturmführer on September 18, 1939, Müller-John has 50 Jews shot dead near Warsaw.
There was a sort of a fake excuse made up for him that some people had fired from houses and that he had reacted. But in reality, he simply decided that he was going to kill people. He was targeting them because they were Jews.
The Wehrmacht arrests Müller-John. The commander in charge wants to have him court-martialed.
With the Müller-John case, the Wehrmacht wanted to set an example. They wanted to demonstrate that SS men could not simply do that sort of thing right under their noses.
From prison, the SS man seeks help by writing to his superior, the commander of the Leibstandarte, Sepp Dietrich, who turns directly to Hitler. Hitler orders the prisoner to be released immediately. Müller-John returns to the Leibstandarte and is later promoted. At the end of the war, he commits suicide. In occupied Poland, SS men murder more than 60,000 people, mainly Jews, within a single year. The perpetrators are under the direct command of SS Reichsführer Himmler. They are policemen or members of the armed concentration camp guards, the so-called Totenkopfstandarten, under the leadership of Theodor Eicke. The crimes horrify many officers in the Wehrmacht. Even though most of them consider Poles inferior, the mass murder of civilians goes too far for them. General Johannes Blaskowitz complains in writing about the brutalization and moral corruption of the actions in Poland.
He and many members of the Wehrmacht believed in a certain military code of honor, that there's certain things that one simply shouldn't do unless absolutely forced to. And one of these things was the mass murder of civilians.
Also out of fear of resistance from the Polish population, Blaskowitz also demands an end to SS terror in the conquered territories. In the face of the Wehrmacht's criticism of his SS task forces, Himmler is forced to react. He says he is doing nothing that the Führer does not know, and Hitler not only knows what the SS is doing, he wants things to remain that way.
Hitler's response to Blaskowitz and criticisms by senior army officers of the brutality of the German troops in Poland was to say, this is not the Salvation Army, you don't fight a war in this way.
The critics in the Wehrmacht fall silent. In October 1939, Hitler decrees that special jurisdiction applies to members of the SS and to police on special duty. This means that the Wehrmacht military courts no longer have jurisdiction over the SS. Hitler wants to wage a war of extermination in the East by conquering new living space, Germanizing entire regions, and destroying the Jewish world enemy. The armed SS units are fighting on the front line in support of this murderous worldview. For Hitler and Himmler, the SS soldiers have proved their worth during the Polish campaign, despite all their military shortcomings. At the beginning of 1940, Himmler is allowed to further increase the size of his SS army. At the beginning, the Waffen-SS comprises the following branches. The Leibstandarte under Sepp Dietrich, upgraded in 1941 to the 1st SS Tank Division, SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Next to them, the Verfügungstruppe. Under Paul Hauser at the end of 1940, they become the 2nd SS Tank Division, Das Reich. And the Totenkopfstandarten, originally concentration camp personnel. In 1942, under Theodor Eicke, they become the 3rd SS Tank Division, Totenkopf. On May 10, 1940, the Germans attack in the west. Under the high command of the Wehrmacht, Waffen-SS units also storm through Belgium and Holland towards France.
An der Spitze der deutschen Truppen stoßen die Formationen der Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler mit einer Panzerdivision gegen Rotterdam vor.
For days on end, the port city is besieged by German troops, and fighting is especially fierce at the bridges. The German Air Force is told to bomb Rotterdam. Dutch officers start negotiating a surrender, but the news never reaches the German bombers. More than 800 people die. German troops enter the city. Among them are members of the Leibstandarte. They shoot Dutch soldiers who have long since surrendered. Kurt Student, a general in the German paratroopers, orders the SS men to cease fire. Student is hit in the head by a ricochet and is seriously injured. The Waffen-SS lacks discipline and expertise. Commanders like Sepp Dietrich are military amateurs. As head of the Leibstandarte, he's in charge of several thousand men. The young Wehrmacht officer Philipp von Boeselager later experiences an order issued by Sepp Dietrich.
It wasn't the kind of order we were used to, with clear goals and clear boundaries and so on. Instead, it was more like, we'll do it this way, and you go right and you go left, and I'll watch out. I was very surprised at just how unmilitary those orders were.
The SS replaces its lack of military expertise with a prescribed contempt for death.
The first campaigns of the SS were characterized by a will to assert themselves as a military elite at all costs, but at the same time, often by a lack of professionalism, which led to heavy losses now and then.
But losses hardly matter if the end result is a victory. Within a few days, the neutral states of Holland and Belgium are overrun by German troops. The next target is France. The German troops advance quickly and push the enemy towards the Atlantic coast. The port city of Dunkirk. From here, French and British soldiers are evacuated to safety in England. The Germans are moving ever closer, including SS Totenkopf units. Not far from the coast, they come across a unit of the 2nd British Infantry Division. The British defend themselves stubbornly until they run out of ammunition and surrender. The SS have suffered heavy losses. Their commander has the 100 or so British soldiers in the village of Le Paradis lined up and shot. Only 2 survive.
In these crimes, one constantly encounters the will to assert oneself as a military elite by erasing any perceived traces of military failure.
On May 28, 1940, in the village of Warranted, British soldiers are surrounded by men of the Leibstandarte. Here too, the SS have suffered heavy losses. The British soldiers surrender. They include 19-year-old Albert Evans.
They weren't very pleasant people to meet at all, none whatsoever. I mean, our officer pleaded with the 1 SS, and he said, the point of where you're going is a point of no return.
The British are driven into a stable, and SS men throw hand grenades into it. Evans is injured, but manages to escape with his captain.
This SS guard follows us down, 3 yards round, bang, bang. Captain was dead. And he turned around and fired at me, but the bullets hit the tree. I was lucky. They just hit me in the back, grazed in the back of the neck. And
Evans faints. The SS man thinks he's dead.
I happened to look up. I could hear all the automatic firing, and I wanted to go back to my comrades. And then I thought, well, in my state, I don't think I'd have got there. I'd have been killed before I got there. Anyway, I could see this farm in the distance, which I managed to crawl into, and that's what saved my life.
More than 80 British prisoners are murdered at Warranted by SS men. Heinrich Himmler stylizes his SS murderers as Nazi Praetorians. The Black Order is considered particularly Aryan and loyal to Hitler. The men of the Waffen-SS now add the image of self-sacrificing super warriors to Himmler's propaganda. This myth is to be spread by a separate PR troop.
These SS war correspondents had an important function in spreading certain views, certain myths about the SS, and they did so very, very successfully.
Hitler also publicly praises the achievements of his SS men after the victory in the West, even though they contributed little to the success. Inexperience and ruthlessness have been costly. After the Polish and Western campaigns, the Waffen-SS have suffered heavy losses. Their ranks have to be replenished. The Waffen-SS, an army of volunteers, according to the propaganda. Himmler initially recruits his soldiers mostly from the ranks of the General SS, honorary SS men. But this reserve is quickly exhausted, also because SS members are drafted into the Wehrmacht. New recruits are mainly attracted by the elitist image, the men are proud to be chosen. In 1941, 17-year-old Wolfgang Filor becomes an SS man.
When I got the conscription order, I walked around the whole town and was happy that I'd been called up, because at the medical examination in the summer of 1941, out of 80 men, only 3 or 4 were accepted. The others only joined the Wehrmacht, not the Waffen-SS.
In addition to a dashing image, the Waffen-SS also offers social advancement opportunities. Young men without higher education can make a career in the SS. A career like that of Sepp Dietrich, a general without a high school diploma, is unimaginable in the Wehrmacht. In the barracks of the Waffen-SS, the recruits learn how to handle weapons and receive military training. There is a special emphasis on physical training, as with all armies of the world. But the men of the Waffen-SS are more than just ordinary soldiers. Their inner attitude is also part of the drill.
The SS man was supposed to be extremely tough, and the kind of training they got was in a way rather similar to the sort of punishments they would mete out to concentration camp inmates. Extreme cruelty, extreme harshness, unquestioning obedience.
In 1942, Jürgen Girgenssohn volunteers for the Waffen-SS.
We'd been seriously drilled during our training, almost like animals, in fact. Sometimes it was very, very brutal.
If one of the young men does not achieve the set goals, the whole group is punished. So pressure from the instructors is exacerbated by beatings from comrades.
Not everyone could stand it. There were also some who wanted to get out of it. And the only way was suicide.
The prototype Waffen-SS warrior is tough, courageous, and above all, victorious. At least that's how the Nazi newsreels present him.
SS-Sturmmann Fritz Christen, der als 20-Jähriger der jüngste Ritterkreuzträger der deutschen Wehrmacht ist in seiner Heimat. Innerhalb von 24 Stunden vernichtete er nicht weniger als 13 feindliche Tanks.
A hero of the Waffen-SS. The propaganda has an impact.
As a young guy, as a soldier, when you came home and you didn't have a decoration, you were basically nothing. Everyone would have loved to get the Knight's Cross, no matter how.
The prospect of winning medals leads many soldiers to their deaths. To further swell the ranks of his Waffen-SS, Himmler lowers the entry standards. The minimum height of 1.70 m is abolished. Severe visual impairment is no longer a problem. From 1941 onwards, it becomes easier for new volunteers to join.
Waffen-SS recruiters go to Reich labor service camps and Hitler youth camps and put the young men there under considerable pressure to volunteer. The requirement is that they give up on their own ideals to avoid the Führer being disappointed by a lack of suitable candidates.
The German victories in Western and Northern Europe open up promising prospects for the Waffen-SS recruiters, who now become active in the supposedly Germanic brother nations. In Himmler's understanding, these are the Scandinavians, Dutch, and Belgians. Here, Himmler has units of the Germanic SS founded, modeled after Germany's General SS. From their ranks, the Waffen-SS is replenished. In Belgium, the SS mainly wins supporters from the Flemish National Federation, a party that advocates the secession of Flanders from Belgium and has fascist tendencies. After the Germans occupy Belgium, the National Federation collaborates with the Nazis. One of its supporters is Oswald van Ortichem. In 1941, he volunteers for the Waffen-SS at the age of 17.
The great wave of volunteers only came after the war with Russia had started, and the Flemish leadership had called for volunteers in the fight against Bolshevism. Firstly, and secondly, to acquire for Flanders an equal place in the new Europe.
By 1945, almost 10,000 Flemings had joined the Waffen-SS, in addition to 22,000 Dutch, around 6,000 Danes, and about 5,000 Norwegians. From 1942 onwards, Himmler also accepts women into the Waffen-SS.
The women helpers within the SS were a very small group and were actually listed as SS members. Here we have a group of about 2,500 people who were actually selected as SS helpers from the women's and girls' organizations of National Socialism, usually young unmarried women who then took on tasks in the SS.
Ober-Enheim in Alsace. Here, from 1942, Himmler sets up the Reich SS School, housed in country estates, the only SS school for women. As stipulated in the operational regulations, the female SS helpers are trained for the communication service as telephonists, teleprinters, and radio operators. Male intelligence personnel can thus be transferred to the front. The requirements for radio training are high. The women have to learn foreign languages and also how to operate the Enigma cipher machine. Ideological instruction and mother training are also on the curriculum. SS Chief Himmler has precise ideas for the future of the SS women.
Das sollen Bräute und Frauen für unsere jungen SS-Männer und Führer in der Zukunft sein.
Any goings-on with strange men or nighttime excursions result in dismissal from the SS. Liaisons with SS men, on the other hand, are tolerated, as long as no petty jealousy is involved. After the Second World War, the female SS helpers are not classified as members of the SS and usually avoid prosecution. Yet from 1943 onwards, they are deployed in all branches of the SS, including concentration camps. On June 22, 1941, Germany attacks the Soviet Union. For Himmler, the real mission of the SS now begins: to conquer living space in the East and to destroy alleged Jewish Bolshevism. Himmler's Waffen-SS has grown to 5 divisions, but this is still only a fraction of the total German strength of 150 divisions. Within a few weeks, the German advance far to the east. The Soviet army is not prepared. Entire units end up as prisoners of war. By 1945, over 3 million Soviet prisoners of war will starve to death or die from epidemics in Wehrmacht camps. A forgotten part of the German crime of the century, but entirely in Himmler's interest. In a 1943 speech to the SS leaders, he declares,
Wie es dem Russen geht, wie es dem Tschechen geht, ist mir total gleichgültig. Ob die anderen Völker in Wohlfahrt leben, ob sie verrecken vor Hunger, das interessiert mich nur so weit, als wir sie als Sklaven für unsere Kultur brauchen.
The war of extermination began as early as September 1939, but with the invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, it entered a whole new dimension.
In the late summer of 1941, the Wehrmacht continues its advance on Moscow. The plan is for the conquest of the capital to bring victory. But in mid-October, the German advance gets bogged down in the mud. Rain is followed by snow and frost. Expecting a further Blitzkrieg, the German soldiers are not equipped with winterproof clothing. Thousands freeze to death. The Soviet Union counterattacks. The Red Army pushes the Germans back, and Moscow is held. Hitler blames the Wehrmacht leadership, and in December 1941 assumes supreme command of the army himself.
Hitler thinks that the German army lacks the ideology and the fanaticism to confront a Bolshevik enemy, to use the term of that time, that is ideologically superior to it. He therefore increasingly favors the fanatical soldier. And in his opinion, the Waffen-SS man is the perfect embodiment of that fanatical soldier.
Himmler sees his chance to further expand the Waffen-SS and arranges for a PR campaign. Since the beginning of the war, cameramen and propaganda personnel have followed the German troops on their campaigns. Himmler uses his own SS war correspondents and sends them to the front. SS men in combat, filmed at close range. The footage is welcomed by the newsreels.
Männer der SS-Standarte Wiking, die zum großen Teil aus nordischen Freiwilligen besteht. Jede Handbreit Boden wird heiß umkämpft.
In proportion to its size, the Waffen-SS appears much more frequently in the newsreels than the Wehrmacht does.
The war correspondents certainly helped to make the Waffen-SS seem more important at the time. But above all, their views, their opinions, and the images they created of the Waffen-SS, which they also actually published, have contributed to how the Waffen-SS is still perceived to this day.
Early 1943, at Stalingrad, 250,000 German soldiers and allies are surrounded by the Soviet army. Their situation is hopeless. Less than 1/3 of them survive the battle, and thousands more die as prisoners of war. After the defeat at Stalingrad, Waffen-SS units in Ukraine are located outside Kharkiv. A few weeks earlier, Waffen-SS General Paul Hauser had ordered his troops to withdraw from the city. He had thus avoided an encirclement, but had lost the city to the Red Army. In March 1943, the Germans attack Kharkiv again. Soldiers of the SS tank divisions Das Reich and Leibstandarte retake the city. The victory is achieved with heavy losses, but the Wochenschau is jubilant, especially about the Waffen-SS.
Der Weg, den diese Soldaten kämpfend zurücklegten, war hart und schwer. Aber angesichts des Sieges sind die ungeheuren Strapazen dieser Winterschlacht bald vergessen.
Hitler is hoping for miracles from the Waffen-SS. By the beginning of 1943, its ranks have grown to 8 divisions. In the last 2 years of the war, the dictator deploys the Waffen-SS on various different fronts. The Führer's fire brigade is often brought in where defeats threaten. Wehrmacht officers like Bernd von Loringhoven changed their attitude towards the SS.
They were excellent soldiers, extremely brave men. And most of the time, they were also better equipped than you were. So you felt pretty safe when you could lean on a Waffen-SS unit.
After years of rather moderate effectiveness, the tanks division of the Waffen-SS proved to be strong in battle. Like comparable units of the Wehrmacht, the troops receive the best recruits and the most modern equipment, and are quickly replenished after losses. Newly formed divisions, on the other hand, often fight only with looted weapons. For example, the SS Mountain Division, Prince Eugen. The Mountain Division is the first SS unit to consist almost exclusively of so-called ethnic Germans from Serbia, Croatia, and Romania. The division operates mainly in the Balkans. Its task is to fight partisans in Yugoslavia, and it commits numerous war crimes in the process, also against civilians. The Mountain Division is one of several SS units that Himmler creates for operations in the Balkans. In February 1943, a division is formed from, literally, Muslim volunteers. The 13th Waffen Mountain Division of the SS Handschar. Its emblem is the saber. Muslims from Bosnia as cannon fodder for the Waffen-SS. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem is particularly important for recruitment in the Balkans. Muhammad Amin al-Husseini has lived in Germany since 1941 and becomes a member of the General SS. Himmler emphasizes that Muslims are united with the SS by their common hostility towards Judaism. But the new fighters are difficult to reconcile with his idea of Nordic purity.
Himmler then creates the instrument by saying that a Bosnian Waffen-SS member is not a Bosnian SS man, but a Bosnian serving in the Waffen-SS units. He creates, so to speak, a special right to membership of the Waffen-SS for peoples who are not included per se in the overall Germanic concept.
By May 1945, the Waffen-SS has grown to 38 divisions. Many of them are only formed in the last year of the war and are immediately annihilated during the first frontline deployment. At the end of the war, some continue to exist only on paper. Of the more than 800,000 men who serve in the Waffen-SS during the Second World War, almost half are not from the German Reich. The Waffen-SS is a multi-ethnic army. On June 6, 1944, Allied troops land on the French Atlantic coast. The Waffen-SS is ordered to repel them. Mainly young, inexperienced soldiers of the newly established SS division Hitler Youth are available.
When it was set up, we didn't like the name at all, because it sounded like we were young kids, and we wanted to be real soldiers.
Many 16 and 17-year-olds joined the Waffen-SS straight from the school classroom. Young people who have grown up in the Nazi state and experienced years of propaganda and Nazi training. Among them is 17-year-old Bernhard Heisig.
There was no danger of us reflecting on any of our actions. That wasn't our job. Our job was to follow orders.
The majority of the young people did not survive the fighting. Bernhard Heisig would later process his impressions of the war as an artist. In the final months of the war, the Waffen-SS long since stopped relying on volunteers alone.
In the final phase of the war, from 44-45 onwards, when Himmler also took over functions such as Chief of the Reserve Army, the Waffen-SS forcibly conscripted young men. It's estimated that about 150,000 young men weren't actually volunteers at all. They joined under duress.
In view of the approaching fronts, Hitler relies more and more on the SS. In July 1944, he makes Himmler head of the replacement army and army equipment. The Reichsführer SS is thus also responsible for Germany's so-called Wunderwaffen, or miracle weapons. Rockets. Since 1938, in Peenemünde on Usedom, the Wehrmacht has been researching the new type of weapon. Under the direction of engineer Wernher von Braun, the so-called V-weapons are developed. After Allied air raids on Peenemünde in 1943, the V2 weapons factory is relocated to the Harz Mountains. Near Nordhausen in Thuringia, the rockets are built underground in a system of tunnels. The SS takes over the organization. Prisoners from camps assemble the V2. Beside the mine tunnels, a new concentration camp is built, Dora Mittelbau. In the summer of 1944, Himmler wants to push ahead with use of the rockets and accelerates production. By the end of the war, 6,000 V2s are produced here. By April 1945, the inhumane working conditions here kill 20,000 concentration camp prisoners. In the late summer of 1944, Antwerp and London in particular are bombarded with V2 rockets. 8,000 people are killed. The hoped-for turnaround in the war does not happen. By the end of 1944, the Nazi regime is under pressure on all fronts. In Eastern Europe, the Red Army reaches German soil in East Prussia. And in the West, the Americans and British are close to the border. The Waffen-SS is fighting on all fronts, and Himmler looks for more miracle weapons to still avert defeat. One of the projects is the so-called Natter, the first vertical takeoff aircraft with rocket propulsion. A disposable interceptor made of plywood designed to knock Allied bomber fleets out of the sky. The Heuberg military training area. On March 1st, 1945, the first manned test launch of the Natter is to take place here. At the launch pad, pilot Lothar Sieber discusses once again with designer Erich Bachem. The takeoff succeeds, but shortly afterwards, the aircraft goes out of control and crashes to the ground. Pilot Lothar Sieber is killed. Himmler continues his research on the Natter, but even this secret project cannot change the course of history. Hitler's last ally is Hungary's government under the fascist Arrow Cross Party. But the Red Army is already on Hungarian soil. Since Christmas 1944, Hungarian soldiers and units of the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS have been trapped in Budapest, about 70,000 men. Hitler demands the unconditional defense of the fortress of Budapest. The commander of the city, an officer of the Waffen-SS, obeys. The battle lasts over 3 months. 150,000 people die. The SS units are almost entirely wiped out. Despite such military disasters, Nazi propaganda continues to emphasize the super warrior image of the SS as the last bulwark of the regime.
What's fascinating is that we still associate the Waffen-SS with this elitist image today, because it was emphasized so much during the Nazi era through the propaganda measures of the regime. Those Waffen-SS tank units, Reich, Totenkopf, Viking, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, and in part the Hitler Youth, were all propagated, so to speak. It's a myth that's somehow been continued.
A dangerous myth that leads many SS soldiers to give up their lives for a long-lost cause. In the final battle for Berlin, it is still units of the Waffen-SS that defend the government quarter to the last. Among them are a noticeable number of foreign SS volunteers, Danes, Latvians, and French. Among them, 26-year-old Henri Fenet.
We didn't think about death at all. Not at all. Just about fighting. Carrying on fighting.
An unconditional will to persevere. For some SS men, it was based less on loyalty to Hitler than on fear of the victors.
The knowledge that one had fought far outside the norms of international law and international military law of that time, and that the violence one had sown would now return with a vengeance. And if that feared revenge by the victors did occur, it would be the SS. The SS men would, of course, suffer the most.
The chance of surviving capture for a member of the Waffen-SS was, indeed, lower than for members of the Wehrmacht. Not all SS soldiers had been involved in war crimes by any means, but that made no difference. The tattooed blood group under the left upper arm alone identifies the men as members of the SS, automatically making them criminals for the Allies.
Tattooed on his skin for life, as his SS ideas are in his brain for life. He is incurable.
The murderous madness of the SS, a warning from history.
That's what I tried to make clear to my students as their teacher, that war isn't anything heroic. It's blood and tears, and fear, and dirt. I told them not to be seduced again by such adventures, because that's what I thought they were back then.
The men of the Waffen-SS, trained to be fanatical, unscrupulous fighters, ruthless on the battlefield and to themselves. The vast majority of the perpetrators are never held accountable. After the war, many keep the myth of the Waffen-SS alive, with no regrets and no remorse.